So it seems that we are live here. I'm going to see sort of viewers pop into this stream. For some reason, the other stream wasn't really kicking off. Let's see if Mick messages me back on Skype. No one's really in here. If not, we can just cut this part out in the beginning. But anyways, I am starting strength coach. My name is Alex Koesarie. I'm based in Virginia Beach, Virginia. With that, I am a USA Judo black belt, and I have been rock climbing for a good number of years, about 7 or 8 years. Seems like we just had somebody pop into the stream. Hello, whoever that is. But we do have a lot of questions to go through. So if you're in the stream, say hi in the chat. It could be you, Mick. So, let's see. Hey, somebody else is in here. Hello, whoever that is. This is going to be Q&A session number 2 for the Starting Strength Novice app people from Strength Club and the subreddit. So if you found your way here, that is going to be, this is the backup stream. So we had a scheduled stream, but for some reason that guy's not working. So we changed it over to this one. So say hi in the chat so I know who you are, and then we'll get started if we get some more people in here. Okay, well, I guess I'm just going to start then. Yeah, so we got a good number of questions to go through. So here's kind of my flight path, what I'm thinking for this whole thing. The first one we're going to do is going to be doing bodyweight training at home, kind of progression and metrics, kind of how to advance. We had about 3 or 4 questions on that one. The next question, or next kind of section, is going to be about running conditioning work with the novice linear progression, and then kind of how to program that. The third big section is going to be on form and criteria. So kind of like common form errors, questions people had about that, and kind of how you're going to judge the lift, kind of what criteria you need to continue and advance with, and then to finish it off with programming. So our first question about bodyweight training at home was from Raphael. Raphael said, can you please provide some guidance on programming for bodyweight exercises? He wants to assume just the standard starting strength linear progression with A and B workouts every second day. And then his second part of the question was, should I just increase the reps each session or go for a fixed number and try to get them done faster? Essentially, what you're looking for here are kind of the essence of this. The essence of this question is going to be, what are our progression metrics for doing non-barbell work? Because with barbell work, we've created it in such a way where we can add even something, where it's like half a pound of an increment, depending on how finely you want to micro load it. Normally, we're going to be taking 5-pound jumps, so it's very flexible in what exactly we can add. With bodyweight exercises, since the rep ranges are generally going to be very higher, unless you're doing like hard gymnastics work, and then the amount of volume, and normally the frequency paired with that is going to be very high, you have to figure out different ways to make things harder and to make things easier so you can get a sufficient amount of work in. So take like a chin-up, for example. So, the situation when you're programming a chin-up, if you can do 2 reps, is a lot different than if you can do sets of 10. So we'll kind of start, and this really applies for most bodyweight exercise work. We'll start in the direction, we'll start with that 10 chin-ups. Then the second case we'll do is, you can do 1 or 2 chin-ups. In the situation where you can do a lot of whatever given exercise that you would like to do, you have a few ways to make it harder. So the first one would be adding weight, similar to our barbell work. So you can put a backpack, put some XYZ in it to make it heavier, or get a weight belt and strap like some sandbags or whatever yourself. The next and kind of the trickier ways to gain progression on your bodyweight exercises are to change your tempos. So you can do like a chin up where you're very slow on the way up or very slow on the way down. You can add a pause in the middle, things to that effect. The thing would be density. So, if you can do 15 to 20 chin ups in one set or something high like that, the next best strategy would be density. So let's say in this next 20 minutes, I'm going to get as many chin ups done as possible. After that, it's going to be in terms of like volume goals. So volume goals for kind of the day or volume goals for the week. So you can kind of expand your density blocks out to the hour and say, in this hour, I'm going to get, what's fairly reasonable, let's say 130, 140 chin-ups done. And that's, again, more if you're advanced, or if you're already very strong and relatively lean, you get away with those things. And then, of course, the next thing would be to start incorporating some sort of progression on a skill. So if a chin-up or a pull-up is really easy for you, and you are already doing them with whatever reasonable amount of weight you can do them while doing an L sit, or you can kind of change any of the above variables like tempos or pauses or things like that. Or you can even change your grip up. So, so like one hand close, one hand far out, that's an archer pull-up. A lot of climbers do those. In terms of making things easier, which is what I expect a lot of people are going to have to do for these things, you're going to want to go down in the skill progression. So instead of doing like a full chin up, you can jump up to the top and do a negative and let yourself go back down. Or in a situation where you're doing something like push-up, you can, instead of doing a standard push-up, you can do a push-up on your knees or an incline push-up, or some of the easier variations for there. And then in terms of programming, you're going to want to mix and match. If something is a little bit too easy, but also if something is, if you need an increase in difficulty, so if you can only do a few strict push-ups, still do a few strict push-ups, and then get your back off volume in by doing the easier variation. With that also kind of applies to our harder variations too. So if you can do weighted chin-ups, you don't want to only do weighted chin-ups. You're going to do your weighted chin-ups, and then whatever other volume work you need to progress with your kind of standard form, or even if you're trying to get more and past that with that easier variation, something like a negative. In terms of actually making bodyweight training hard, chin-ups and pull-ups with household objects, you can definitely go really, really far with those. But in terms of kind of push-ups, it is a little bit awkward to load them without plates. So you can have someone who's light sit on your back, like a small female or a child, if you can do that. Or you can start working into your planche variation. So the planche sort of being like when your arms are straight, pretty extended, you're leaning your shoulders well past your hands, and eventually you're picking up your whole body with just kind of that front raise style push. The planche variations are a way to make push-ups really hard. And in terms of kind of your trunk work, much as we like to avoid saying the word core, a hollow body position and an arch body position tend to be the foundations for all gymnastics. And that's going to be on your road to your L sit and your V sit and your planche. So those are definitely really important. Those are things to look into. This is Raphael as well. He did ask any specific exercises to do and to avoid. In terms of avoiding, try not to do a progression outside of your skill range. So there's going to be it's pretty binary in terms of what you can or cannot do. It's not like a squat where, technically Ray Williams is doing a squat just as much as, Colleen is doing a squat, if they're both meeting the criteria, and they both have a bar in their back. In bodyweight training, in kind of our progression-based training, what you're looking for there is more movement quality more than anything. So with that, you don't want to try a front lever if you can't do a front lever. You're going to, of course, to try it, but like if you continually kind of beat your head at it and continue to just think the only way I'm going to get better at doing front levers is by trying to do front levers, that's not going to work. There's a pretty regimented and pretty well-defined kind of discrete series of steps in the gymnastics world as to kind of how to get to these harder movements and things that you can do. And the same thing with things that are a little bit more attainable, something like a pistol squat. So going from like a bodyweight squat with both legs that you can do, a million of, to a Bulgarian split squat, to an assisted pistol squat, something going on from there. We have a few more people coming in here. Hello to all three of you. Last time we had, maybe about 10 people in the actual live stream. We had about 700 people show up so far. for watching the whole thing, which is pretty cool. So that seems to have answered Raphael's question in terms of things to avoid, things not to avoid. And just to really pin that down on to avoid, you want to be, I don't want to say humble, but I think humble may be a fair word for that, you know. You don't want to try things that you can't do, for sure. Just like with a barbell, you wouldn't go up to the bar and then load 4 or 5 on your back. You're not going to just try and L-sit on your first day, and you're not going to try a weighted pull-up on your first day either. So you really have to respect them just as much as you do with barbell movements, and kind of program them and increase carefully on your rep ranges and your weight, your progressions, and things like that. One of my clients, Patrick, he asked me a really good question about this for this. He said, what are the benefits of doing a lift to failure, and any tips on pushing yourself to go to failure rather than stopping a rep or too short? The reason that we don't go to failure on our barbell movements is that oftentimes it's really not worth it on a primary movement, you know. So it's like the fatigue cost of doing a squat set to failure or a deadlift set to failure is really high, and you can, you know, not to say ruin, but, you know, you can really disrupt your training for the next probably 3, 4, 5 days if you push that hard enough. With our bodyweight movements, like a set of push-ups, you can take that to failure, you know, 10 times in the same workout, and you'll be fine in 2 days. That's going to be a nature of the amount of muscle mass used. It's going to be a nature of the range of motion, depending on what exercise you're doing. A lot of times they're shorter than the barbell movements. And on top of that, I think most importantly, the absolute load is going to be a lot lighter. So with your bodyweight stuff, you can definitely really push that to failure more frequently. In terms of amount of reps and amount of volume that is useful, you can stop probably 3, 4, 5 reps away from failure and still have it be useful. But that's a lot of times not really the sensation that people are going for. And if you kind of want to collect volume and aggregate that through the week, stopping a little bit farther away from failure may be a good idea. But, you know, if you're kind of just doing your standard 3 times a week, workout A, workout B, workout C, separating that Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you can really start taking this stuff to failure. If you are training at home, you don't access to have really heavy weights. Your goal is to really work in a relevant range of intensity for your goal with sufficient volume. So, you know, for a beginner, the reason why we're having them do their 3 sets of 5 is, especially given the weights that they're going to be working at, that's a relevant range of intensity for them. So they don't need to go absolutely all out. They also don't need to be going well below their limit and doing a ton of reps. So the start of the LP and kind of how that expires or transpires through its course and eventually terminates, that's really going to define it. You know, it's going to be a relevant range of intensity for our goal at a sufficient volume. Eventually, the volume needs to go up because that amount of work just isn't enough. So you're going to start trying to squeeze things in here, or there. And eventually, if you go too high in intensity, you'll have to pull it back. Body weight exercises are going to have a really low fatigue cost, so you can push for that volume as your skill increases. And as well as with that, your skill is really going to limit your progress on a lot of things. Where it's just like there are 400-pound squatters who can't really do a good pistol squat, and it's not like mechanically they don't have the power for it. It's going to be their skill. So with that, if you are very skilled with bodyweight training, and eventually when you start picking up with it, probably let's say another 2 months into quarantine, you can start planning your reps out a little bit more accurately. Bob D said, I was wondering if you could get some guidance on back extensions. I don't see any reference regarding sets or reps. Bob, it's a pretty good question. It's good that you're doing back extensions. A lot of people neglect those. Those are in the book. That's in the blue book. And say in the deadlift chapter and the programming chapter, they're going to talk about using that as kind of a reprieve from the deadlift, but still a good way to get some lumbar or maybe some lower back work in. I completely agree. A lot of people don't program them. I do if we have access to them. The reason that people don't program is that a lot of times the person is going to be flexing and extending their spine over and over and over. Ideally, what we want to do is have that pad or whatever that bracing stretcher is set a little bit lower on your hips. So in that situation, you can actually just rotate your pelvis about your legs instead of flexing and extending your back. It's totally possible to do this with a rigid spine. You can load them pretty accurately. Start with a few sets of failure to kind of get your gauge. So let's say if you can do 8 reps, you think with good form in the first set, try and go for more sets of 8 the next time, and then after that, maybe up it to 10. So kind of just play that game to increase your volume there. But on your days that you're doing back extensions to take a break off for deadlifts, you can probably just be doing some light deadlifts. That's probably totally fine. Mike got a good question. Squat rack at home, how much floor space? He was interested in getting a starting strength rack. Luckily, those are pretty low profile, so that's good. With the squat rack at home, you can get essentially all of your work done inside. Oh, hey, Mick, there he is. How do I get the plate on my back for weighted push-ups? Yeah. I'll finish Mike's question and move on to Mick. But for Mike's squat rack at home, you're going to need as much space as the barbell can provide for you. You can do all of your work inside of the squat rack, unless you got one of the fixed arm positions, but just don't get one of those. So with the fact that we can adjust the height of the safety pins, you can do your deadlifting, your pressing, your benching, everything in there. And then essentially what we recommend is kind of a 4x8, so 4 feet deep by 8 feet long. That way the barbell can be contained in there and you have a little bit of wiggle room. That should definitely fit most racks. So Mick, how do I get the plate on my back for weighted push-ups? Normally you'll put the weight in front of you down on the ground. You'll lay behind it in that situation, prone on your stomach. You'll reach in front of you and you'll just place it on your back. The other way to do it is kind of get into a kneeling or all fours position. And then, with one arm, just kind of toss it up there. It's a little bit more high impact. But normally, if you'll figure out some way to do it just on the ground. Some start get near their side. They'll let it fall into their back and then they'll pull it over and across. Okay, the next block of questions that we had, this is interesting, and I think a lot of people should start doing this a little more. It's running and conditioning and starting strength and obviously linear progression. The first question was from Abby, and then we had Rich and Amy after that. And essentially, they're asking how to incorporate running into starting strength and NLP. So to Rich and Amy's question. So they said, "Hi, Alex. I've been training starting strength for about 6 weeks, so congrats on your start. I've been able to add 5 kg or 2.5 kg to the bar every session. I follow the advice for only to strain strength and not to go running. I have a dirty secret. I went for a run yesterday and a run the day before, and I'm worried all my progress will stall or worse." So running with that, it's really going to depend on your conditioning before you started the NLP. So if it's a situation where you were, let's say, like running 5Ks or 10Ks every weekend, you're pretty in shape, you're very used to running, and it's not a novel stress for you, and you're acclimated to it, you don't really need to adjust your programming that much. Your LP will stall a little bit early, sure, but that may not be the end of the world depending on your goals. So if you're a career runner, you do still have to keep running, even if it's a good idea to take, a few weeks of it being lighter. If you're new to running completely, so let's say you have a lot of free time now during the quarantines, and then with that, you're just trying to get outside a little bit more, you're going to want to place them towards the tail end of your week. So if we have workout A, B, and C, on that same day of C, maybe afterwards, just go for a 10, 15-minute run, and then immediately the day after that, then you can go for another one. That way you're still getting enough time to fully recover before Monday. But in any situation, you're not going to want to have the obvious interferences that one would expect. So you could say, like, if you wanted to do it on Tuesday and Thursday, if you were working out Monday, Wednesday, Friday, that would probably be not a bad idea, but it would be a little bit trickier. In that situation, you'll probably would interfere with your squats and your deadlifts the next day. If you can try and place these things on the weekend, it's really no big deal. In terms of aiming for distance PRs or for time PRs, so if you're starting to do time trials with yourself, you're going to want to really, again, depending on your priorities, you're going to want to see what goes first, what goes second. So if you're aiming for a squat PR on Friday, and you also want to, hit like a distance or a time PR on your Thursday run, it's probably not a good idea. I would always say that on your second priority, so if strength training is your priority, running is kind of the second priority, always take jumps that that you can hit. Kind of sandbag it a little bit, so if let's kind of invert it, and if running is your priority, and then you can add 10 pounds to the bar this session, just add 5, if you can shave, let's say 15 seconds off your mile, if you really push it to like a 10 out of 10 pace, maybe just take 2 or 3 seconds off, maybe just repeat the same time. You have a lot of time to train logistically. You should be training for your whole life, so there's really no rush to do PRs. With the second priority that you have, given the lifespan of your training. And Timothy O, he said, "What are your thoughts on farmer's carries?" I think farmer's carries are a really good type of conditioning for lifters, especially given that they feel like lifting. You don't really feel like you're doing conditioning work. You're not on the bike, you're not on the rower, and it's a really good way to get your heart rate up to, very, very high, kind of redline it. My best farmer's carry have been around 200 in each hand for about 30, 40 yards. I think it was around 33, if I want to say, if we measured it out. And they're really, really taxing. they're almost too taxing at the beginning. So one of the big problems is that you'll have people who are very strong. So let's say if you have a guy who's pulling 365 and he decides to start, doing farmer's carries, he's going to be able to do very heavy farmer's carries, and he may actually kind of, I don't want to say ruin, but he may disrupt the rest of his week or the next week too by really burning himself out. Because whenever we're doing new things, we tend to really go hard with them. So if you're going to introduce them like running at the tail end of your week so you have more time to recover. And then with that, treat them more for distance and for laps more than weight. So it's not really kind of a deadlift that you can run with. Think about it more like a speed and a power event, whereas you're taking a weight that you can handle for a distance very quickly. Short stall steps rather than strides, all this standard advice for those sorts of things. But you don't for squats and deadlifts if you are planning on having progress a little bit later in the week. And it just as a general note, I really think that most people can do with more conditioning work. It's not something, if you do it kind of smart and responsibly, it's not something you're ever going to really regret. It's very possible if you shoot for a 40-pound PR in a squat, you may regret it a little bit afterwards, especially walking the next day, especially if you miss it, But if you are saying like, hey, I'm going to add a 20-minute bike ride in on Monday nights, you're not really going to regret that. It's only going to have positive impacts for your health. And you can get away with it as long as you introduce it kind of slowly and carefully. Having someone to monitor that is definitely a plus. So we had a few questions on kind of form and criteria. The first one, probably with the longest answer, is going to be from a guy named Otter. Hello, Otter. He said, in my deadlift, my ability to keep my back and proper extension gives out about 15 pounds below my ability to lock out a deadlift regardless of form. Should I limit my work set weight to the highest weight for which I can pull the fifth or are very, very litigious? So it's a very well-written question. He said he is 63 years old, 5'9", 144 pounds. His heaviest 5-rep work set with the correct back position is about 190 pounds. One thing to expect through all of lifting and kind of why we express or hamper so much on form at starting strength is going to be that it's not going to be perfect always. And the point of pushing the weight and point of increasing all of this is because it's not going to be perfect always. That's why career lifters, they have coaches. So it's not like you can just do it once, you have it correct, and it's just set forever. Definitely continue to push yourself. Kind of the grade that you're looking for, saying, is my form degrading too much, is kind of around like a B+, So let's say if you're taking it off the ground and there's a significant amount of spinal flexion no matter what, maybe drop the weight down and kind of reorganize your form a little bit, see exactly why you can't get into that good back position, that good extended position. I would definitely say that 190 pounds at your weight, depending on how long you've started the LP, that's a pretty good weight. You'll definitely be able to get some more out of that, depending on if you want to gain weight. It's a personal choice, but I would definitely recommend it for you. Given that 144 pounds is pretty frail and pretty brittle. When you're starting to kind of get in that age range, you're going to need kind of this almost critical mass, so that if you were to fall or something, you won't break a hip. But in terms of advice for if you should add weight or not, continue to add weight. But just note that we can't really see your deadlift from here. So the way that I'm operating and kind of assuming that we're going through the question is that there is an acceptable amount of spinal flexion, but it is present. If it is kind of a horrendous amount of spinal flexion, or if it's a binary thing where, let's say at 180 pounds, there's absolutely no flexion. At 190, you have like a fishing rod for your back that looks like this. Then there's going to be a technique problem, and I would definitely recommend reaching out to a coach for that. But if you just kind of feel it, or if you're paying attention a lot to your lower mid back and you start to feel it kind of crunching in on itself, that's almost the point. The point for all this heavy stuff, for the squats is the bar's trying to fold you in half and you need to stand up with it, and the deadlift does not want to move off the ground. You have to make it move. So there are going to be times when your form is compromised to move a weight. With the kind of the heavier work, or let's say for the things with the highest absolute load, so something like the deadlift or the squat, it's going to be different than the press. So something like the overhead press, it's a very fine thing. Because of how far the weight is going away from our center of mass, modulating that flight path is really difficult. So with that, it's definitely not a situation in like an overhead press where I'm like, yes, don't focus too much on technique, just get the bar over their head, because it's so sensitive to technique deviations. But with the deadlift, if you feel like your spine is flexing a bit, that's probably fine. But again, we can't see your deadlift from here. So post it on the Facebook group, the Reddit. or contact a coach. So, and then we have MPAL66. I was just talking about the press. He said, is the push press a better full body workout than the standard overhead press? So starting strength uses a series of criteria to judge whether or not things are good or better. And then this is a pretty common question. Oh, hey, it's Mark. I find that the NLP gets a bit monotonous after a while. Is there a way to slightly mix up the routine, stay motivated without losing the overall benefits of the program? There definitely is. I think we had a question from Marcus a little bit later on, so we'll probably get to yours if I haven't already. I would say conditioning work, adding in some fun activities for yourself, really chasing some weighted push-ups or some weighted chin-ups or even a pistol squat, things like that. Even if you still have barbell access right now, you're not going to regret it, the same as, taking a hike outside on the weekends and considering that part of your routine or considering that part of your exercise. The barbell work it can get a little bit monotonous, but the reason you're doing them is for time efficiency. The reason you're doing them is for just general economy, with the criteria that I'll talk about in a bit. That's kind of the reason that we select them, is because of those criteria. They check all of the boxes of everything you could possibly want. But there's no need, you can't really experiment with some other things. Like if you want to get some pump work in and do some curls or something after your deadlifts, totally fine. The lifting police aren't going to come and arrest you. But you got to make it fun for yourself. And the big thing with kind of lifting and with diet is that you kind of have to find a love for the process more than a love for the results. So if you do kind of get too obsessed with 5 pounds on the bar, 5 pounds on the bar, eventually, when you're well into intermediate programming, let's say even advanced programming, if you get there, that's going to be pretty far away. And by then, you have to really love the process of exercising and taking care of yourself and training, more training so than just exercise. But you do got to find ways to make it enjoyable for yourself. I know me, I tend to lift with my wife. We have a great time the entire time. That's pretty rare. Most people end up fighting whenever they're lifting like that, especially when one of them is a coach, I'll tell you what. But I definitely listen to podcasts, some audiobooks, things like that. So going back to MPAL 66 question, the push press versus standard overhead press, that's going to be a question of those criteria that I was talking about. So the criteria are going to be if the lift, or it's going to be satisfied if the exercise is going to move over a long range of motion using a large amount of muscle mass. It's going to have a reliable training response, and it is going to allow you to get stronger. So to give you some examples of things that don't work, that would be like a Turkish get up, where you lay on the ground and you pull the kettlebell up and you stand all the way up with it. But you can't really train it very reliably, and it won't really allow you to get that much stronger. So at most, you're going to be using a decently heavy kettlebell, but that's going to be throttled by your wrist strength and your elbow strength before it's going to be throttled by your back or your legs. So with our criteria that we're choosing, we can kind of realize, okay, we're going to need something that we're going to need heavyweight for, that we can load very easily to give us that training response. So it's going to be something with a barbell instead of a dumbbell or a kettlebell. And then now that we've arrived at barbells, we can kind of sort out our fundamental movement pattern. So pressing over our head, pressing away from our chest, pulling something off the ground, and standing up with something on our back. And you kind of arrive at these terminal things like the overhead press that we do, the squat, the deadlift, things like that. So the push press, you're going to be using more quote-unquote muscle mass. Because you're going to be using a lot of leg drive, you're going to be using some quads and some glutes and things like that. So we would say, hey, from an initial standpoint, that would be satisfying our criteria of using more muscle mass. But at the same time, is the push press going to allow us to get stronger? How far to push press? If you're push pressing efficiently, your legs are doing so much of the work. Your triceps, your delts, your chest, things like that aren't really doing much at all. It almost becomes more of a jerk at a certain point more than a push press. And so the next question is that allowing all of this stuff to get stronger? Not really. So there does kind of have to be a realm of pragmatism and reasonability with kind of the exercise selection, which is why we end up doing kind of the hip drive with the press. So the hips forward to rebound the bar up and clear our head back. That's a good balance between something like push press, where there's more muscle mass, but it's not really that trainable, versus the super strict press, which uses a bit less muscle mass and has pretty reliable training response. So we got Grow Eco. Hello. He said, hi, how can I persuade my old dad to start starting strength? He's very weak back and neck, and I think he's scared to start weightlifting. He has a disc problem on his back and not sure if it would be helpful anyways. I would first, it's going to depend on kind of your information level and kind of his information level on, or to me, educational level on why he has these opinions. So if he's a radiologist and he firmly believes he has a disc problem and that lifting is very bad for him, that's a different conversation. He just has a work colleague in a computer science job who has a bad back, and he thinks that if he does any sort of exercise, he'll end up like that guy too. So you're going to have to figure out where you're starting from. But talking to people about these issues can be very sensitive because you're asking them to do a thing which requires a lot of effort. It doesn't. I mean, it benefits them, but not immediately. It benefits them in the long term, and on top of that, or at least in their head, it can have a capacity to hurt them. So the first thing that you need to explain is the barbell training, especially well supervised, is incredibly safe. So the incident rate per 1,000 hours is really low. I want to say it's like 2.1 off the top of my head. And again, per 1,000 participation hours across a broad population. So barbell training overall is really safe. The next thing that you would start to talk about is kind of the literature on back injury itself. And kind of what a disc problem is. Most specific cases, or to me, most cases of non-specific or multifactorial back pain, especially lumbar pain, it doesn't really equate to some sort of tissue damage. So meaning like some sort of like annular tear in a disc or a disc bulge or herniation or things like that. That's normally about 2 to 5% of cases off the top of my head. And then with that, those injuries are going to heal on their own, really, no matter what you do. It would be very unfortunate if they didn't, because we'd have a lot more people, walking around with bad backs. After a certain age, if you really take a lot of imaging of any 40-year-old spine, you're going to see a lot of abnormalities. So for me, I've done a lot of grappling in my life. I've done a lot of hard things. My back on imaging does not look good. I've had some imaging in my back, and I'm like, oh, man, that doesn't really look great. But again, I am very asymptomatic with it. So the first step that you're going to have to do is disassociating his fear of kind of his bad back and what a disc injury is. And you're going to have to reconcile that with reality, where it's like, hey, pain is a really complex process. The pain isn't, theoretically coming from that disc problem. It's a multifactorial issue. In the training, some amount of training is going to be beneficial for him, So if you're trying to get him to do the squat, ask him, have you gotten off the toilet today? Because if he has, he's gotten a squat. Now, if you could say, hey, would you be willing to hold a gallon of milk in front of you or a gallon of water while you got up off the toilet? Do you think you would die? He'll probably say no. And then with that, you've already introduced the concept of loading a squat. If barbells are really something scary for him, you can start without barbells and eventually work into it. So start with a goblet squat with a kettlebell, or so with the dumbbell or something like that, and start with like a kettlebell deadlift on like a raised box. That's totally fine. The goal is to kind of accumulate a series of wins for him psychologically so that he can be reintroduced to training, because training is essentially what you want. You can argue about the minutia of efficiency or inefficiency, but really, I would be, I think you would probably be happy too if he was doing Zumba or if he was playing on Wii Fit, more so than just being completely sedentary. So you're going to have to start addressing those psychological issues. There's a lot of good content out there on kind of how to do motivational interviewing like that to get people into a position where they're willing to try new things, but it is very hard. What I would probably recommend, depending on what your time investment is on this, is just contacting a starting strength coach who is familiar with the content, and then junior high gym class. Hi, Fred. Yeah, so depending on, your level of time investment in with this, I'd probably contact a starting strength coach. A lot of us are on the up and up about kind of how to address these issues. A lot of them are PTs, DPTs, and they'll really be able to help you out. So Fred Wagner says, being tall and lanky, I got destroyed by you in junior high gym class in Oklahoma. Wrestling is big there. Yes, so actually, the guy who owns my judo gym here in Virginia Beach, he wrestled at Oklahoma in college. His name was Ari Miller. He's a great guy. But Oklahoma it's a tough room for wrestling. So we'll move on to the next question. We got DonWallow. He said, when it comes to squat stance, is it the wider the better, assuming I can get to sufficient depth? I can go wider than 2 times shoulder width. That is pretty crazy. I'm not sure how much I believe you with the 2 times shoulder width thing, because that either means you have very narrow shoulders, or you have some sort of weird, incredibly open pelvis. The reason that we say knees out, toes pointed out about 30 degrees is because it provides a good midpoint in terms of the adductor stretch and with the rebound for the rest of our thigh. The last and final reason for us shoving our knees and our toes out is that it's going to clear the tissues and the flesh from our femur in the anterior, superior, inferior spine, or the anterior, inferior spine of the pelvis. So essentially, there's some bony sters with your femur at the front of your pelvis so that they can run into each other if you shove your knees straight. So essentially, we need to clear the pelvis. The article that you're looking for on this is called The Active Hip 2.0 by Mark Ripito and Steph Bradford. That goes into it really thoroughly. So definitely read The Active Hip. It's not the wider the better. Because the goal is that we are trying to load your back. So to load your back, we need an sufficient level of torso angle. So if this is your torso, this is your hip, this is your head. If we have you with a really wide stance, which makes your femur shorter, and you have a very vertical back, you're not working your back. The goal is to work your back. We were trying to fold you in half and trying to crush you with the weight if you want to get stronger. Especially, training back, training glutes and hamstrings and things like that. So that criteria that I referenced a little bit earlier in the video, a super wide squat does not satisfy that. In the situation where you're doing a powerlifting meet and the goal is to lift the most weight possible, and the criteria is different, your sense of structure of how you want to model your lifts is different. So something like that in powerlifting, that'd be super cool if you could actually get away with it. But in terms of general strength training, that's not really something you want to do. We got Mark S. again. Do you watch the Arnold Classic? Why does the winner Huff Grossman only get $70K in prize money after deadlifting 1,000 pounds? Their actual strength. Strongman is not that popular of a sport. It's not the NFL, not the NBA, anything like that. So what you'll see is actually most of the strongman guys now, they're just kind of starting YouTube empires. So, Eddie Hall, Brian Shaw, Hafthor Bjornsson, Martins Lisis, they're just kind of pushing the social media. So, they're definitely doing well for themselves. But those events, kind of those fitness expos, the thing that they're kind of being paid for or paid in is almost really exposure more than anything, Everybody, even my mother knows Hafthor Bjornsson's name, and she doesn't. She's never touched a barbell in her life. Presumably, your mother may too. So with that, strongman has never been a super well-paid sport. It's definitely one of those things where those guys are super committed, and it's for the glory, of doing the win. And then now with social media, they can have quite the career. So. All right, so we're at one of the final sections, plus whatever questions anybody pops in here with. This is going to be about programming. Growico again. Doing a squat with a kettlebell would be effective as well. It drives me crazy. I can't go to the gym, and I'm trying to work out at home. What should I do? Be careful. Should I change the form a little bit? Well, Growico, I don't know if you popped in at the beginning of the live stream, but I talked a good bit about bodyweight training there. So check that out, kind of how to progress, kind of what metrics you're looking for. For your dad, a squat with a kettlebell is going to be way more effective than not a squat, So the kind of what are you going to do, not train, incredibly applies to most populations. Because again, most people aren't deciding to train. Most people haven't picked up starting strength or another sort of training manual and then decided to go from there. But you're going to want to continue training even if you don't have access to a barbell. So if the options are first best or nothing at all, go with options 2 through a million before you don't take anything at all. So. In terms of modifying the form, you'll figure it out. You don't have a kettlebell heavy enough to really throw off anything to the point where the form that you learned in starting strength is going to be too far off. You're probably going to have to think about driving with your hands more so than your hips, but it should sort itself out. So programming. So we got Danny H. He's saying, what would you recommend to me as someone who ran the novice linear progression in late 2019, so that was a while ago, and was ready to transition to intermediate training, but hasn't strength trained for a few months? Should I just run the novice LP again, and should I do anything differently this time? So Danny H, definitely run the LP again. It's going to be an abbreviated or an expedited LP. So you're not going to start your squat at 135 pounds and add 5 pounds of jump. You've already built up a sufficient base of strength and hopefully some muscle mass that you've attempted to retain since this period layoff. So late 2019, that could be, July, or that could be, December. So those are going to be different situations depending on the layoff. But you're going to want to do the NLP again. Start conservatively, because if you just kind of try and chase your old numbers on day one, you're going to be in a bad place for a few days in terms of muscular soreness. But I would say start the LP again. In terms of doing anything differently, you're going to take more aggressive jumps. So probably 20-pound jumps on most things for maybe a week. Probably on your deadlift, you can probably run that for a few weeks, then switch to 10-pound jumps, and then back to 5 again. it's going to last less of a time too. So you've already been desensitized to all these sort of stimulus pathways from the novice linear progression and from barbell work just in general. So you're going to have to probably modify your approach to the early intermediate stuff, because you're probably going to get there very soon. So instead of a novice LP, let's say the first run, if you do it right, it's going to last you, 2.5, 3 months. In this case, that may last you 4 or 5 weeks. So be prepared for intermediate training sooner rather than later, depending on how aggressive your jumps are, and also depending on how athletic you are. It's very possible you haven't lost much strength, but if you're like me, if you're on the far left end of the genetic spectrum, you may have a lot of work to do. So the early intermediate training, that's the famous Great Wide Open. That is a complicated area of training to be in. So definitely recommend, reading the grade book, reading practical programming, or getting a coach. So we got Jimmy Tak here, TAK. I'm a novice and just started the SS progression. Congrats. My question is, how do I know if I should reduce the weight I add every training? If the answer is if you fail to get 5 reps in the previous training, please know, as I am currently forced to train at home and can't fail to the floor. So hopefully, Jimmy, you are working in a power rack. So if you fail a squat or at least something with safety arms, in that situation, you get yourself stapled to the floor. Bailing out of a low bar squat without a rack is quite hard. You have to pick your torso up, trying to throw it behind you, or you can, try and roll it in front of you off your head. So please, for the love of God, be training either very reasonably, so taking out weights you can hit, or be training in some sort of rack. So when to know if you should reduce the weight you're adding every training session, that's going to depend on how much weight you're adding now. So if you are, let's say, 3 weeks in and that's you're just started and you're adding 10 pounds a session, everything, that's fine. You can probably keep that up for a while. What you're going to want to do is video yourself. So film your training and then look for a drop in bar speed. So bar speed is going to be how fast you are moving that bar in space. If you are noticing that your rep 1 speed is dramatically different than your rep 5 speed, so your rep 5 takes a 4-second grinder off the floor, and your rep 1 speed took kind of 3/4 of a second. In that situation, that you're approaching kind of those higher RPE or the higher intensity levels of work, and that you shouldn't keep adding another 10 pounds. If it feels really, really hard, it's very possible it doesn't. So just be conservative with it. The worst case is you add less than you could have, and you end up doing another session on the tail end. So even if you're only adding 5 pounds a session, that's still 15 pounds a week. That's a lot of pounds across the month. So don't be overly eager to add weight, especially if you're in a situation where you can't fail. And then for the deadlift, if you're deadlifting at home and you're trying to either not damage your floor or try not to make any noise, just throw some pads into there, some blankets, some quilts, some rolled up towels, something like that. Even if you reduce the deadlift range of motion for a little bit, it's not the end of the world, but don't drop a barbell through your 2nd story floor. So Avi, again, AVI, I said, I make constant progress with deadlifts and squats, though I feel like I'm stuck in the overhead and bench press with just a small difference between the current weight and the weight I am starting with. My technique seems at least as decent as my squatting and deadlift, and probably even better. What could be the problem? A few things that you're going to look for, Avi. It's going to be the first 3 questions by Mark Ripito. He's going to ask you, are you eating enough? Are you sleeping enough? And are you taking manageable jumps in weight? So in the situation where you've been trying to add 15 pounds in a session and the bar is just not moving, that's a little bit silly. Pull back on your weight intervals. If you are at a caloric deficit, if you're, let's say, running a 500 or 600 calorie deficit, you're tracking well and you're feeling hungry all the time, those things you probably shouldn't expect them to move that much, depending on kind of what your initial body composition was. And then if you're only sleeping 2.5, 3 hours a night, you're going to have to reframe your expectations as to where your level of gains are going to be at. If you're doing everything correctly, so you're eating at least maintenance or a little bit of a surplus, so 300 calorie surplus, you're sleeping fairly well in relationship to your normal amounts of sleep, and you're taking reasonable jumps, you're going to need to put in more stress somewhere. If you are also alternating, so if you're going bench, and then press, bench, press, what you can do is just bench on Monday and Friday, since that higher absolute load tends to drop. So like, let's say if your press is stuck at but you can move 110 for all day, that's a situation where you're just going to need more stress in there. And it's not really going to be super helpful for you. That's why a lot of people go, or even sets or singles, excuse me, really close to your working weight or higher than your working weight for that 5. Really, they should be higher than your working weight for 5, just to continually drive that up and then get the rest of the back off work in. If one of them is moving, so if your bench press is moving and your press isn't moving, or vice versa, that's a situation where you'll start to expect or to assume that it's going to be a technique error. So if your bench press is just not moving at all and your press is continuing to rise, there's 2 situations. Your press was sandbagged, same failure point, or the other situation is that there's an egregious technique error. So let's say you're touching incredibly low on your chest on the bench and you have to reverse curl the bar back in to press it up. Or even say, let's say it's a reverse situation and your press is stalled, but your bench is moving and you're pressing it really far away from your head right out of the bottom. So what you're going to want to look for these is that everything is going to rise at roughly the same rate until it doesn't. And then when it doesn't, you got to figure out what training adjustments you're going to make. And normally that's going to be more work for you. The only situations where it's going to be less work is really none. You're not going to be able to get away with doing less work, especially with the press and the bench. So as a general thing, and this applies to our body weight stuff as well, certain things are going to exist at a novice level of training or a novice level of progression, and other things that you're also doing can be at an intermediate or even at an advanced schedule. So for me, like the tricks that I have to do to improve my overhead press kind of are almost on like an advanced schedule, but the things I can do to improve my squat and my deadlift, those are, fairly intermediate styles of things. So it's very possible, or basically it's what's happening, is that your overhead press and your bench press are needing intermediate programming. You're not giving it to them, but your squats and your deadlifts can just keep running along with novice programming. And a function of that is going to be, the weight on the bar, things like that, kind of total muscle mass used. But the bench press and the press are the things that start to stall first every time on the LP. So make sure that you're doing your chin-ups. Hopefully you're at a bit of a caloric surplus depending on your body composition. But there's a lot of resources that you can look to fix this problem. The first one, of course, would be the Gray Book Practical Programming. Really understand the hell out of the first half, and you should, know what to read from that point on. Or contact a coach. One of us can sort that out for you real fast. And then we got Kyle L here. He's saying, what's the greatest way to improve your grip strength? Just do deadlifts, or are there useful things like pinch blocks, captains and crushers, axle bars? Are those more useful? If so, how should they be implemented? So this is a fun thing. This can actually, be tied back to a few people's questions. Who was that? That was Mark S. Yeah, so Mark S. He was talking about the monotony of the starting strength and obviously your progression. A lot of people take up grip stuff. It's kind of a fun, not super fatiguing thing to do. There are a lot of ways to improve grip strength. Not all of them transfer to all of them. So there are things called support grips. So like, let's say if you're rock climbing and you have an open crimp, so like if my hand's essentially holding like this grip strength to hold my fingers at this angle is going to be very different than my crushing grip strength to squeeze a captain's and crush. And it's going to be pretty much as different as it's going to be holding a deadlift. So they do transfer. So if you started deadlifting and you deadlifted 90 pounds the first day, and you're deadlifting 450, your grip strength has 100% improved. You've added, 2-3 pounds of muscle to each forearm. But when you start to get towards that stronger, more intermediate level of training, you can close the captain's and crush 1.5. You're going to have to start doing pretty specific things. You could just drive your deadlift up to 700. You'd probably be able to close the 2.5 or 3. But that's pretty hard. It's pretty hard to drive your deadlift up to 300 or 700, and it also takes a while. So there are a lot of things that you can do in the interim to get your deadlift strength up. It's probably say the best thing, depending on what your kind of goals are. Captains and crusher grips are great. I've closed to 2. I'm really close to a 2.5. Those, you'll really have to learn how to set them. So that's surprisingly technique-based. If you go at them without technique, you're not going to be able to close really the 1, But things like pinch blocks and axle blocks are definitely really great. You can do plate pinches at the end of the workout. I really like to incorporate these as light deadlift variants. So, let's say you're in the situation where, you can't do your deadlift 3 times a week or however many times a week that you're doing it, and you need to drop one of those deadlift days and add in some accessory work. Something like an axle deadlift is probably pretty cool. You can also, at that time, now that you have more training resources to throw around for that day, you can definitely use some pinch blocks and things like that. In terms of programming them, frequency is going to be very helpful, but you'll notice a pretty hard wall in terms of how much you can do in a given week. So hand tendonitis with your flexors and everything here, that can come on really quickly. So that actually just happened to me. I just got some rock climbing hang boards in the house here. And then with that, I went them the first day that I had them, and I had an elbow and kind of wrist aches for about a week, because I wasn't as conditioned as I could have been. And then with that, the rest of you is going to be stronger than your hands, so you're going to want to push it harder, So like, let's say that if you're trying to pull a pinch block, a block axle off the floor, or just a standard axle off the ground, your back's not that tired, your legs aren't that tired, so you're going to want to push it to a 10 out of 10 intensity, but maybe hold back on it. Definitely hold back on it for quite some time, because you'll have to realize that the interface between your grip strength really trying at a 10 out of 10 versus the rest of your body working there, they don't communicate exactly the same. So start conservatively, go for very high frequency more than high volume. So don't do it like a bodybuilder, like a bro split, and be like, I have a forearm day once per week and I just kill my forearms, because your deadlift training and oftentimes like your press and your bench training take a hit after that. The stability in your hand is not there. So go for frequency, even if you just kind of did like some pinch sessions or some crushing sessions after really at the end of every workout. If you're if you're doing it conservative enough, you will adapt to it. You'll adapt to whatever you want to. And then from there, it's just one of those things where, in terms of increasing the resistance on those, it does take a while. So like the gap between closing a captain's crush 2 and a 2.5 is a lot. Closing a 2.5 to a 3, it's almost impossible. So you're going to have to find ways to make things more difficult for yourself pretty slowly. It's not dissimilar to bodyweight training in that way, especially all the variations that you could be doing. But yeah, so don't overuse the volume. Keep the frequency really high. And then, just have fun with it. So someone like Mark, he's talking about, the starting strength novice LP getting a little bit monotonous. Definitely can, that's the process of getting good at anything. If it's the violin or if it's this, it's going to get monotonous after a certain point. You're going to have to find a love for the process. So if you don't like what you're doing at the time, it can be a little bit hard to stick in there. It's totally understandable. But just remember, training is always better than not training. So let's see what else we got here. We had a good question about training children. Someone was asking about their teenage kids. I want to say they're 13 and 14. How can they start training? Would starting strength be the right place to train for them? Never force your kids to do. I know I don't have kids, so I'm sure there's going to be a lot of parents who watch this who are going to have very definite opinions about this. So I can give you the best answer that I've heard and express that to you with a little bit of my own opinions too. Is that you don't want to make it training. So your kids aren't going to be able to train in the way that you and I were, or are, and hoping to continue to do. You're gonna have to treat it more like play. You're gonna have to treat it like a game. So if dad is in the garage banging some weights around and your kids want to come out and try a squat with them, totally encourage that, but don't expect it to be a thing where they're going to be like, hey, how should my knee angle be, or how's my toe angle in the squat? Like, is it looking like I'm having hip drive coming out of the hole? So, Brian Allhouse. Hey, Brian, how's it going? Good to see you here. On a similar topic to grip strength, anything you'd recommend for foot and ankle strength? The things I'm already having you doing, like broad jumps, squat jumps, things like that. You're trying to desensitize it. You're not really going to be able to change the bone density super dramatically, or expect any massive reorganization with everything going on in there. So I would definitely say keep doing the higher impact stuff you're doing, in addition to just kind of getting out there and walking about as much as you can. So hopefully that answered your question. If it didn't, I think I'm lifting with you tomorrow. So back to training your kids. You're going to have to treat it as play. So don't expect everyone to be taking it as seriously as you are. So if you're like, oh man, I'm going to get my kids a college scholarship by, getting them under the bar and then having their kids be, 800-pound squatters by the time that they're 18, don't try and push that hard, because you're just going to have them grow to dislike training as a concept. You're going to have to treat it as play. With 13 to 14 seem a little bit young. You're aiming for Tanner stage 4, if I remember correctly, on their development scale. But if you are interested in developing your child's athletic ability, I would go and read the book Range by David Epstein. It's essentially talking about how skill acquisition across all fields is a game into itself. So just as much as baseball is a game, learning skills is one. So if you want your kids to be good at learning things and good at picking up techniques, and learning athleticism, have them a lot of opportunities to do that, you know, so not just like casual dodgeball and maybe one night a week of practicing a sport. Get them in 3 different sports for the year, and, you know, go on a hike with them and go on a bike ride and things like that. You being more active with them is going to set the best example, so that they'll want to train when they're 16 and 17 and, you know, well into puberty, and we'll be fine with it. So give it, you know, another year or 2, and they'll definitely be able to train rather than just, you know, have fun and exercise with you. So last question, Greg. Thanks, Greg, for this one. He says, I have more time on my hands now. What things can I do outside of lifting to improve my health and complement the novice linear progression? So we've talked about that a lot, actually. So the bodyweight training, you can already incorporate that into the NLP without too much consequence. Just as much as the conditioning work that we've talked about, and even things just like being more active with this last guy with his kids. The goal here, or to me, the thing that everyone needs to understand is that you're not going to reach a point in your lifting career of being strong enough where you're like, oh, okay, cool, I just pulled 405 for the first time, I am done lifting. Or I am done with my career with strength, and I will just coast on that 405 for the next 4 years of my life. Training, and kind of, you know, the good quote from it in the Blue Book is kind of like the paraphrasing here is like, humans aren't normal in the absence of hard physical effort, from Rip in the Blue Book, starting strength. So it's very true. The current exercise guidelines for Americans, really no one is meeting them. A very small percentage of the population is meeting them, because we have, you know, aerobic and anaerobic requirements to that. So they want you to be resistance training, but also getting your heart rate up. So that's one of those things where, you know, hey, go for a run, go for a bike ride, go learn a martial art, go rock climbing, something like that. Especially now, given the time for quarantines, things outside are generally okay to do. If you're stuck inside, see the first part of this podcast, check out Rory Alter's stuff. Some of the other SS coaches did a good one on this on the Facebook page. But that's going to be one of those things where you're aiming to kind of improve your general quality of life by getting out and moving more, hopefully losing a little bit of excess fat tissue that you don't need. And then, you know, I wouldn't say that it's going to, I wouldn't say really that anything you're going to do is going to detract from the novice linear progression. You know, so if you decide to go and make your recreational activity going up and like shoveling sand or shoveling gravel, that's probably going to interfere with the novice linear progression. But most everything else that isn't hard labor is going to complement it. You know, so just get out there, be active. But outside of that, this has been the Strength Club Q&A number 2. So sorry about the technical difficulties at the beginning with kind of switching the live stream things. But, you know, thank you all for watching if you sticked around. And this is going to be sent out and on the YouTube page for all of us to watch afterwards. So be sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell. And if you do need some coaching, check me out. My link is going to be in the description below, as well as the Starting Strength Coaches directory. So thank you guys for watching if you have, and I will talk to you later.